So we're standing in the city of David on the eastern side, right above the Kidron Valley. Looking south in back of me, right below, is the actual Gihon Spring, the main water supply for the city of Jerusalem. But right below our feet are running walls, pre-Israelite walls, the original Canaanite walls of the city that were also used by the Jewish inhabitants after the time of King David. And we see here in the remains of these walls, there was a gate, which could well be, archaeologists believe, the water gate. It's debated where exactly it was, but in the Mishnah and Tractate Sukkot, it mentions when the water was drawn from the spring, it was brought to the water gate. When they got to the water gate, they would sound trumpet sounds of a tekiah, a shvarim, and a tekiah, all the way up to the Temple Mount. And you can see on the top of the hill up there, the very southwest corner of the Temple Mount, the water would be brought up by the Kohanim with people all along the way rejoicing and celebrating. So this is one of the possible routes used during that water drawing ceremony to bring the water from the spring to the Temple Mount. We're about to go down through the original water system, the tunnel that connects from inside the wall down to the spring, which is the original water supply of the city of Jerusalem. This tunnel was dug in the Middle Bronze period, about 3,700 years ago by the Canaanites, to access the spring outside the walls, and was also used by the Jewish people in Jerusalem for many, many centuries until an alternative water system was built. So we're going to go down and actually go to the source of the water for the city now. So we are at the Gihon Spring. This is the central water supply for the city of Jerusalem, which is a large karstic spring located on the eastern side of what is the hill that Jerusalem sat on, Mount Moriah. It's the main water source for the city. The Canaanites, who inhabited the city first, built an ingenious system of tunnels and fortifications and a tower over the spring to allow them to protect their water and access the water even during a time of siege. And that same system was used by King David and onward until an alternative system was built later in history by King Hezekiah. We're talking about water, and water is the most basic commodity after air for life. You can't last more than 3 days without it. It's what we need to live pretty much more than anything else. And to build a city in the ancient world, in a place like the land of Israel, where it doesn't rain for half the year, you have to have a good water supply. So this spring, the spring of Gihon, is absolutely central to the whole history of the city of Jerusalem. And the holiday of Sukkot is focusing on joy and also bitachon, security, that we're under the protection of God. And water is one of the basic things we need for security, and it's a perfect convergence of a lot of different ideas when we get to Sukkot. We have this idea of joy, of security, of water. It also is the time of year when it starts to rain in the land of Israel. So during this very joyous week-long holiday of Sukkot, there was a special ceremony that was done every single day of the holiday called Nisuch HaMayim. And it was done by Kohanim who would come down here and draw water as an offering on the temple, on the altar itself. And if you look in the Mishnah, in Sukkot, in the oral law, it says the water libation was performed in the temple during the festival. How was it performed? One would fill golden jugs with the capacity of 3 lug of water from the Siloam pool. There's a bit of a debate of whether the water was taken actually from the source of the spring, which is right below our feet over here, or possibly taken from a pool, a reservoir, which was fed by this spring, which is much further down. But in either case, and it could have been both, possibly different times, first temple period, second temple period, but in either case, the water was drawn from here by the Kohanim in golden vessels, and then in a joyous procession, taken all the way back up the hill and offered on the altar in the temple itself. So we're now at the source of the Gihon Spring, which pumps 1,800 cubic meters of water a day. It doesn't make a difference whether it's raining outside, it pumps this way all year long. And the actual spring begins under here, and down here could well have been the place where the priests would come during the water drawing ceremony to actually draw the water out. For many, many hundreds of years, the Canaanite period and onward, the water would be diverted through a channel a little higher up, and then outside the city to a pool and to irrigate the fields. But later in history, during the reign of King Hezekiah, about 2,700 years ago, he dug a 530-meter long tunnel which brought the water underneath the city of David and all the way down to a reservoir that was within the walls of the city and served as the major water supply for the city of Jerusalem. And that pool was also in the Second Temple period, and could be possibly that during this water drawing ceremony, the water may well have been brought from that pool and not here. It remains a debate, but in either case, from one of these two places, that's where the priests would draw the water for this very joyous ceremony. Now we are at the very bottom, the end of Mount Moriah, the bottom of the old city, the very end of the hill, and we're right above what is a giant reservoir. There remains a small part of a huge reservoir built in the late Second Temple period, about 50 meters by 70 meters, which is built over the site where the original Hezekiah's pool was built. This is where the water that came from the Gihon Spring, many hundreds of yards to the north, flowed through that channel and emptied out here. So this was the main water supply for the city of Jerusalem, the main water reservoir, which was not only used for water, but this whole area could have been used as a giant outdoor mikvah. And during one of the pilgrimage holidays, of which Sukkot was one of, you would have tens of thousands of pilgrims coming to Jerusalem, and many of them would start down here and begin their walk 600 meters, 600 yards approximately, up the hill on that Pilgrims Road, this beautiful street that ran from the bottom of the old city all the way up to the Temple Mount. Now, if the water for the Nisuch HaMayim ceremony, for the water drawing ceremony, was actually drawn from this pool, and the sources tell us that from the Siloam pool, although it's debated whether they took it from the source of the spring, it would have been taken here by the priests in a big ceremony with lots of excitement and joy, and then joyously the priest would be escorted up from the bottom here 600 yards all the way to the temple, where it would be offered as an offering on the altar all the days of the holiday of Sukkot. We are walking up what is one of the most interesting, complicated, expensive archaeological projects, not only in Israel, but probably the entire world. This is called the Pilgrims Road, or the sign in back of me says the way of the Ole HaRegel, of the pilgrimage holidays, which is a perfect place to be on Sukkot, because it's one of the pilgrimage holidays when people would come to Jerusalem to go up to the temple itself. It's an incredibly massive piece of construction. Thousands of years ago, when the temple existed, we would see the sky above us, but it's a street that's about 25 feet across, 8 meters, going all the way to the bottom to the Shiloah pool, the reservoir. It would be taken by the Kohanim from the pool and then walked all the way up the street from the bottom to the top, 600 meters. It's a very long distance, and you could imagine on either side of the street were stores and people, similar to what the Jewish quarter looks like today if you've been to the old city, and it would be a very joyous celebration, with people singing, dancing, clapping as the Kohanim would bring in their gold vessels the water drawn from the bottom of the spring all the way up, continuing the journey into the old city and onto the Temple Mount itself, where it would be offered on the altar. The actual archaeology project, the digging here, is very, very complicated because there are houses and streets above us. You see it has to be supported. Very difficult engineering project that is very expensive. Notice this really cool conveyor belt. This is how they get the buckets full of dirt that they're excavating out to the site where they're going to be eventually dumped and possibly sifted by the archaeologists. This site is not even open to the public yet because it's such a big project. It's going to be a while till it's open, but thank to the city of David, they were nice enough to allow us inside for a special peek at what's going on here. And hopefully, in the not too distant future, everyone will be able to come and visit what is expected to be one of the biggest archaeological attractions in the land of Israel. If you look down at the actual road itself, you see the construction, like everything in the late Second Temple period, is massively huge. Look at the quality of the stone here, the size of the blocks of stone, the weight of them, similar to the size of the stones used in the Western Wall. There's also very little wear on these stones. Based on the coins that were found as they excavated the site, this is dated to about the year between 30 and 40 of the Common Era, and we know that the Second Temple was destroyed in the year 70 by the Romans. So this was barely completed, and maybe possibly not even totally completed by the time the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in the year 70. We're standing at the top of that Pilgrims Road. We've just come from the very bottom of the old city. We've come 600 meters, about 600 yards uphill, and we're at the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. And again, you can see these beautiful, huge paving stones with very little wear, because it was barely used before it was destroyed, that are used for the entire length of this road, which continues another 500 meters up on the entire western side of the Temple Mount. This is the southwest corner. Here's the end of the Western Wall, so to speak, with what was a huge arch above us. But in the time of a pilgrimage holiday like Sukkot, besides bringing possibly the water libation up here with the Kohanim, thousands and thousands of pilgrims would be coming up from the bottom, from the pool, up that long, beautiful street, and then stopping here in all of these little spaces here, and on that side used to be stalls where people could buy not just tchotchkes for tourism, but you could buy sacrificial animals if you wanted to offer them on the temple. You could buy the half shekel coin during the time when that was given. So this was the main street, the Fifth Avenue, but the main pilgrim route for Jerusalem going back to the Second Temple period. And at the time of Sukkot, this would literally be filled with thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews from not just the land of Israel, but also from the diaspora coming to visit the temple on the Oleh HaRegel holiday. Now we are standing on the reconstructed steps facing the southern side of the Temple Mount, 300-meter long, 300-yard-long southern face of the giant platform on top of which stood the temple itself. Now, during the Passover Oleh HaRegel pilgrimage holiday, thousands and thousands of pilgrims would be coming up here and entering through what you now see are these sealed doorways that took you to tunnels and brought people up to the temple itself. But also during the Nisach HaMayim ceremony, the water drawing ceremony, the Kohanim, the priests who drew the water out of the Gihon Spring with much fanfare, joy, celebration, and music would be escorted up through here to the Temple Mount. They would enter the temple, and the Mishnah, the oral law, describes how the Levites would be standing on the 15 steps in the women's courtyard that entered the inner courtyard of the temple, playing music. They'd be blowing trumpets at different places to announce the pouring of the water on the altar, at which point the priest would go up the ramp, and on the ramp itself were two bowls on the Mizbeach, on the altar, and the priest would simultaneously pour both wine and water into those as an offering. Again, this is all connected to the notion of security, of joy, of God taking care of the Jewish people, and of course the beginning of the season when rain, the most valuable commodity that we have, would begin to fall. So it was an incredibly joyous occasion. The Mishnah also describes how during the intermediate days of this week-long festival, they would have a nightly celebration called the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, which was a ceremony celebrating the drawing of the water, in which they would erect giant lanterns in the Ezrat Nashim, the women's section, the outer courtyard of the temple compound, giant oil lamps, and it's described how the light was so bright that every courtyard in the city of Jerusalem would be illuminated by them. And at night they would have tremendous festivities where the rabbis themselves would sing and dance. The Mishnah describes in the Talmud how Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel would juggle 8 torches, flaming torches, and none of them would ever touch the ground. And the Mishnah ends by saying that Misha lo ra'at Simchat Beit HaShoeva, someone who never saw the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the joy of this holiday, never saw a simcha in his whole life. That's how joyous it was. So it was the culmination of what was this incredible, happy, and joyous holiday. And we see we're now back in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is rebuilt. We're standing on the very site where our ancestors went up thousands of years ago. The only thing we're missing is the completion of the ingathering of the Jewish people to the land of Israel and the rebuilding of the temple. And then we'll merit to see, hopefully, the drawing of the water ceremony and the Simchat Beit HaShoeva festival. And may it come soon and in our days. Hag Sameach to everyone.